Well, good morning. Maayong aga sa inyo tanan. How are we doing this morning? Not so bad. You're looking almost awake. It's close. Lapit na lang. Give it a couple more minutes and another cup of coffee and you'll be ready to go. But with that, let's open up our Bibles to the book of Matthew, chapter 16. You recall sa nagligad, Jesus, having rather upset the Pharisees and the Sadducees, this religious leaders of Israel, nagaling siya. He actually went up to the area of Tyre and Sidon. Now that's up by modern-day Lebanon. Now there he met a woman who came to him. She was not Jewish. Importante ni, hindi Judeo siya. She comes and begs Jesus saying, "Buligi sa akon. Help me, Lord, because my daughter is severely demon-possessed." Pero wala sabat sa Ginoo sa iya. Hipos na lang. He says nothing to her. And the disciples begin to complain, "Kasabod gid sa iya Ginoo, napulit na siya, send her home." And Jesus says, "Well, no, I'm not called to those who are not from Israel. Hindi Judeo siya, she's a Gentile. That's not who I'm called to minister to." But the woman didn't stop. Wala unta. She kept pursuing Jesus. "Please, Lord, help me." And he insults her. He says, "It's not right to take the bread that's meant para sa mga bata na lang, haboy sa mga ido," calling the woman essentially a dog, a negative term referring to those who are not Jewish. But the woman just agreed, "That's true. Yes, that's correct. You don't throw the bread meant for the children to the dogs, but don't the dogs even eat the scraps that fall from the table?" In other words, "Lord, I don't need much. You don't need to take away from the Jewish people. Even what's ever left over, that's going to be more than enough for me." And Jesus looked at the woman and said, "You have great faith. Let it be done unto you according to you have desired." In that very hour, her daughter was healed. Now, the question we asked was this: why did Jesus go to Tyre and Sidon? He did nothing else there but meet this woman, whom he ignored, whom he insulted, whom I think he came to see. She was the whole reason he was there, to show his disciples what great faith looks like. And this is going to be important, especially as we continue. Great faith is an incredibly principled idea within the New Testament. It's one of the lessons that Jesus wanted to teach them. You must have great faith. But then he returns, balik na lang. He comes back to the area of the Decapolis, there in the eastern shores of the Sea of Galilee. And when he arrives, mga tao palapit sa iya. And as they arrive, nakumati siya mga tatlo kaadlaw, 3 days they're listening to him. We're told, "Kalaoy gid sa ila kay wala pagkaon. Layo gid sila sa mga syudad." And Jesus says, "Feed them. Let's give them some food. If I send them home now, basin lang nagpon sa ila. They might faint." And the disciples asked the question, which again is amazing. They would ask this question: where do we get enough food? Jesus had just fed 5,000 people a couple of days or weeks earlier, whatever it was. It wasn't very long ago. And duwa-duwa lang sila liwat. How are we going to feed this many people? Only 4,000. Masapos na lang, kay kulang isa kalibo. That's easier to feed, not harder to feed. And Jesus simply said, "What do you got?" 7 fish. We even have more bread, than they do fish. Last time they had 5 loaves, now they had 7 loaves. Jesus said, "That's more than enough. Have the people sit down." He gave thanks, he broke it, gave it to the disciples who fed the people. Hasta busog sila tanan. And 4,000 men plus women and children ate that day. Because Jesus wanted to show what? A lesson that needed to be repeated. And we're going to see this become very important today. God does not care about money. God does not care about food. These are not the things that are concerning to him. God is more than capable of providing everything and anything we will ever need. What does concern the Lord? Let's pick up on our Bible study in Matthew chapter 16. This is what God is worried about. Let's begin in verse 1. We'll read down through to verse 12 this morning. Then the Pharisees and Sadducees came and tested Jesus, asking that he would show them a sign from heaven. Now Jesus answered and said unto them, "When it is evening, you say, it will be good weather, for the sky is red. Pero sa aga na lang, kung pula naman, if it's red skies again, you're going to say it's foul weather, for the sky is red and threatening. Hypocrites! You know how to discern the face of the sky, but you cannot discern the times and the signs. A wicked and adulterous generation seek after a sign, but no sign will be given to it except for the sign of the prophet Jonah. And he left them, and he departed. Now, when his disciples had come to the other side, they had forgotten to bring bread. Jesus then said to them, "Take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees." Ilapinso na lang, kay lipat kami tinapay. They thought because they'd forgotten the bread. But Jesus, being aware of it, said to them, "O you of little faith, why do you reason among yourselves that you have brought no bread? Do you not yet understand? Don't you remember? 5 loaves fed 5,000, and what was left over? 12 baskets. He said again, 7 loaves fed 4,000, and yet you took up 7 baskets. How is it that you do not understand that I speak to you concerning bread? Not the tinapay, but the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees." Then they understood that they were not to beware of bread, but of the doctrine, the teaching of these religious leaders. So get the picture. Jesus has finished feeding the 4,000. Dito lang on the eastern shores of the Sea of Galilee. Nakalin na sila. Nagtabok naman, they come back over to the western side. You remember from Nagigitsimana, they came to the city of Magdala. Lapit na lang sa Capernaum. And when they arrive there, immediately they are challenged once again. Who are they challenged by? The Pharisees and the Sadducees. Stop right there because we need to talk about these guys. Because this is a very unusual group of men to come against Jesus. Pharisees, you may have noted, are never mentioned whatsoever in the Old Testament. You can read from Genesis hasta Malachi, sa bilog sa Old Testament, you will never see the word Pharisee. So sa diyan sila halin. The moment you pick up in the New Testament, at the baptism of Jesus, ara na sila. So they came somewhere between the Old and the New. Between Malachi and Matthew, they were formed. Because the Pharisees were a zealous, religious, conservative group who began after the return from the Babylonian captivity. Pasuway sa mga tao sa Israel. Nagpinahang sang Ginoo sa ila. He sent them into captivity for 70 years in Babylon. Sambalik sila sa Israel to try to keep Israel from rebelling against the Lord, to make Israel be righteous once again. They created the Pharisees to hold them accountable. The name comes from the Hebrew word faresh, meaning to separate. The Pharisees were, you be separate from the world. Don't be like sa mga tao sa kalibutan. They were trying to keep people loyal to the law. They were highly conservative. Pero the Sadducees, bariskat gid. They are the other end of the spectrum. This is your extremely liberal group. The Sadducees, interestingly, their name comes from the Hebrew word tzadek, meaning to be right. So the Pharisees said, we are right. But they were wrong. They were not right. They were very wrong. For they did not believe in the resurrection. They did not believe in heaven or hell. They did not believe in anything to do with angels or supernatural beings. Tanan-tananina, they didn't believe that according to the book of Matthew chapter 22 verse 23. So therefore they were very worldly. All they cared about was that is kalibutan na lang because they thought there was nothing else. Here's the problem. You have an ultra-conservative group in the Pharisees coming together with an ultra-liberal group in the Sadducees. They argue about everything. In fact, they hate one another. They desperately hate one another. Paul, when he was arrested in Acts chapter 23, was brought before the Jewish leaders. Nakantindi siya, nakita siya, may dua ka klase sang tao. There were Pharisees and Sadducees, and he used that against them and got them to argue with one another because they argue constantly. They agree on nothing except not liking Jesus Christ. And this is what I want you to see. Two opposing groups, two groups who never agreed on anything, did come together on this one thing, which was to come against Jesus. Because, and never miss this, Jesus is the one thing everybody agrees on. Did you know sa bilaw sa kalibutan, tanan-tanan mga tao, they agree on Jesus Christ. They either agree to hate Him or love Him. There is no in between. Everyone is going to fall into one of those two categories. People are either for Jesus or against Jesus, and it doesn't make a difference what other things they believe in or hold on to. They may come from different cities. They may speak different languages. They may have different favorite sports teams. They're going, well, I like the Alaskan Milkmen. I don't know, Mayong Dito, whatever the other name of I don't know the basketball teams. I don't follow sports. But whatever sports teams you're like, people may argue over sports, but when it comes to Jesus, they'll start to agree. Enemies become frenemies when it comes to Jesus Christ. Because Paul would tell us in 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 15, we have the fragrance of the Lord. When we follow Jesus, what is the fragrance we give off? Sa mga tao wala kilala sa iya, we stink. The world wants nothing to do with Jesus and nothing to do with us if we follow Jesus Christ. Kung sunod si Jesus, those who follow the Lord, we are the fragrance of life. We are the most wonderful perfume you've ever smelled to believers, but it divides. You cannot be in the middle. When it comes to Jesus Christ, you are an enemy or you are a friend. And in the case of the scribes, Pharisees, Sadducees, amigo hay sila. They united because they did not want the Lord. And they asked him a question. Notice again there in verse 1. They tested him, asking that he show them a sign from heaven. Now this is amplified. This is now the 5th time that these religious leaders have tested Jesus in the book of Matthew. Una was in Matthew chapter 9. You'll recall that Jesus had been challenged, nga kaon ka apod sa mga pasuay? Why do you eat with the sinners? Ikadwa, the second time they tested him was in Matthew chapter 12, where they accused the disciples of Jesus of breaking the Sabbath day. Nga obra ka sa Sabado. Ikatalo, the third time they challenged him was in Matthew chapter 12, verse 38, when they asked for a sign. This is the first time they asked for a sign. Now the second time they want a sign, halin sa langit. Not just a sign from heaven. But they challenged him a fourth time back in Matthew chapter 15 regarding their traditions. Why don't you wash your hands? They were always challenging Jesus, always questioning his authority. They're still demanding him that they gives them a sign, proof, evidence of who he is. Now you might ask, hula lang anay. Why didn't Jesus just point out the things he'd been doing? If you wanted a sign from heaven, how about feeding 5,000 people with 5 loaves? That's impressive. How about feeding 4,000 people with 7 loaves? Equally as impressive. He repeated it. How about casting out demons from a woman in the area of Tyre and Sidon? How about healing the lame and deaf man there on the far side of the Sea of Galilee, in the Decapolis, in that area of the Gadarenes? He'd been doing constant miracles, constant wonders. Hindi pa isip ka damot-damot kabilog. Why didn't he just mention them? Because no sign would have ever convinced these men. It was not evidence, it was not proof, it was not a lack of things that Jesus was doing. It was a problem with their heart. They did not want Jesus to be the Messiah. They did not want to believe in Jesus. Therefore, he never ever could have convinced them. Funny. The other day, I don't know if you use Smart or Globe. My guess is you're smart if you don't use Globe. But I have Globe, and I was signing up Hillel because she's going back to school, and so I was registering a SIM because you have to register your SIMs now. So I'm online, I'm in the little form they've got, and I'm filling out my information, which I thought was strange because they already have all of my information. I've already registered my SIM. Same app, same user, same login, just trying to add my daughter to my account. Sir, we need your ID. Okay, so I forwarded my driver's license. No, sir, you're a foreigner. We need your passport. Okay, I forwarded my passport. And your iCard. I need your immigration card. Okay, here's my immigration card. Sir, we need a picture of you. Okay, here's my picture. Gave him everything they asked for. Submit. Sir, we can't validate your ID. What? I just gave you my passport, my iCard. You took a picture of me. I gave you my address, my phone, all of which, by the way, they already had and had already approved. But they came back and they said, no, we can't validate your ID. It's not a lack of evidence. The world, and then Globe's in on this, the world does not want to believe in Jesus Christ. This is the dilemma. This is the problem. Nothing Jesus ever could have done. He could have done 1,000 miracles. Wala pa mati sila. They would never have believed because they did not want Jesus. They wanted their power. They wanted their authority. They wanted to be in control. They were never going to accept the Lord. And Jesus calls them out for it. Look at verse 2. He gives them a picture. He says, "Wala lang ana, you want a sign from heaven. If the sky is red at night, kalipay ka mo. Because you'll say, buwas na lang, kanaming nga adlaw, it's going to be a nice day. Pero kung inyong pula-pula git sa aga, you go, oy, delikado na, basi anong kalay nga weather subong." Which, by the way, is true. I don't know if you know this. But this is not just some kind of a folklore from the Jews. It actually is the real case. If you see a red sky at night, the reason why you see red at sunset, I thought this was kind of interesting, is because there's a high pressure system. There's been no rain to wash the dust out of the sky. And the reason why the sky looks red is because the dust in the air scatters the light and you see the red from the spectrum from the sun. So it's the dust in the air because of a lack of rain and a high pressure system that causes a red sky, and it means tuod gid buwas kanaming nga adlaw. Pero kung pula sa aga, tuod gid may ulan, malapit. Because if you see red in the morning, it means there's a lot of moisture in the air. And that moisture separates again the rays of the light. And all you see is the red spectrum, and it means sigurado may ulan. So the Pharisees were right. This was correct. This isn't just tradition, it's science. But they didn't know that. The Pharisees could never have told you why red at night meant good weather and red in the morning meant bad weather. They had just seen and observed the signs. And this is Jesus' point. Hypocrites. You have eyes. You have a brain. You obviously can see and you can think because you've proven it with how you can read the weather. How is it that you can see the weather, but you've missed everything that Jesus did? How did you miss the feeding of the 5,000? How did you miss the feeding of the 4,000? How did you miss pila ka tao na okay na sila kay God had healed them? How did you miss every one of these things? You are hypocrites. You don't need a sign. You don't want a sign. You're just looking for an excuse to be able to condemn Jesus Christ. This is the point. He points out to them the hypocrisy of their question. They obviously didn't care a dime about what Jesus said or did. I had this friend, Dugay, now was a workmate, co-worker, many years ago. He came to me one time. He knew I was a Christian. He said, "David, I cannot believe in Jesus Christ." Okay, why? He said, "Because of evolution." Kaya sigurado gituod gid, evolution is a proven fact, and if evolution is right, then God is wrong. Which is correct, by the way. If evolution is right, there is no God. If we are accidents, we were not created. If evolution is where we came from, then God is not real. And I said, okay. I said, what if I can disprove evolution to you? He said, then I would believe in God. Fair enough. That's a challenge. I like a challenge. Let's get into some information. I went and did some research. Let's see if I can figure this out. And I found some interesting things. If you do believe in evolution, by the way, let me just say, that's not wisdom. For evolution is very flawed. There's a law, a science law, not a man-made law, a law of nature, called the second law of thermodynamics. Big word. But the law of thermodynamics says that all things go from order to chaos. Moms, let me explain this to you because you're going to appreciate this. If you clean the house, limpyo tanan, it's all cleaned up. The house looks absolutely amazing. What happens the moment your children walk in? Nalupok. It goes back to chaos. You spend hours to make it look nice. It takes minutes to make it a mess. Everything in the universe goes from order to chaos. Evolution says we go from chaos to order. Things go from random to organized. It disobeys the law of thermodynamics. It goes against the very creation, the nature of the world we live in. Pero may isa pa, do you know we do not believe in evolution in a traditional sense? No one does. Evolution was disproved. For evolution was thought up by a man named Darwin. If you've ever heard of Darwin, he's the founder of evolution. Darwin believed that whatever we do in our life, if you work out all the time, kung kusog gid ka, imong mga bata, mas kusog pa. Kung you study your whole life, kung nagutuon ka permi, inyong mga bata, mas alam sa ila. He thought what you did passed on to your children, which is not the case. What he did not know, and what was discovered long after him, is that everything our children are comes not from who we are, but our DNA. Our genetics dictate what happens, how our children look, how they act, what gifts or abilities they have. It's all genetically based. It's in a code called DNA. Well, if you read the word code speaks of intelligence. Code's not accidental. Code is designed. Every one of us has a code inside of us. And the way that supposedly evolution works is by mutations or mistakes in that code. If you have a mutation in your DNA and it passes on to your children, basilayan sa ila, dugay-dugay, you have an ape become a man. That's evolution. That's what they believe. There's a problem, though. These mutations are almost always harmful. Do you know what we call a mutated code? There's a name for it. Cancer. When you have a mutation in your DNA that causes an error in your code, it's called cancer. Tell me anyone who ever got cancer and said, oh man, this is amazing. I got cancer. I might get superpowers next. I might become a superhero because I got a mutation. I'm going to be amazing now. No. You hear the word cancer and you go, mutations are almost always deadly. This is where evolution falls apart. It disobeys the law of thermodynamics. It relies upon mutations, which are almost always deadly. It doesn't work. I brought this to my friend. I said, here's your evidence. You want to disprove evolution? Here's the disproof of it. His answer astounded me. He said, I cannot argue with what you've told me, but I still believe in evolution because I want to. Ooh, hula langanay. That's not a head issue. That's not a problem with a lack of evidence. That's not saying I can't prove that Jesus is God. That's not saying I can't prove the world is wrong. That's saying you don't want Jesus. You don't want to believe in that. It's not here that's the problem, it's here. And this is these scribes and these Pharisees. They did not believe because they did not want to believe. And if you don't want to, nothing you ever tell them, there is no sign and no evidence, no proof you can ever give that will change their mind, because the mind is not the problem. It's a heart that needs to be transformed. Which is why Jesus responded in verse 4 and told them, a wicked and an adulterous generation seeks after a sign. Now please listen, because this is important. What did they want? If they didn't want Jesus, what did they want? They wanted the world. They wanted sa mga kamat sa kalibutan. They wanted power. They wanted money. They did not want salvation. For Jesus calls them a wicked. The word is poneras. It means layo gid sa Ginoo. Someone who has no interest in the things of God. You are a wicked, but not just wicked. You are an adulterous generation. When we hear the word adultery, it obviously speaks of someone who is unmarried, having a relationship with someone who's not your husband or your wife. That is adultery. Is Jesus saying all these men, all of the women listening, all these Pharisees, these Sadducees, all had extramarital affairs? No. He's not speaking in the relationship to others. He's speaking about the relationship to God. For we are described as the bride of Jesus Christ. We are the church. The church is married to God. If we have someone else in our lives, if we're having a relationship with someone else other than the Lord, we therefore become spiritual adulterers and adulteresses. We are cheating on the Lord. Now, let me tell you why this is powerful. Why would someone cheat on their spouse? Because they think it's going to make their life worse? Maybe their thought is, run with me on this, I have a great marriage. I have a wonderful wife. I have an amazing husband, whatever it might be the case. But you know what? I think I'm going to ruin my life. I think it's a good idea if I just go have an affair with some random person so my life falls apart, my children despise me. I'm going to do everything I can to destroy my life. Does anybody think that? No. What do they think? Mas lipay ko. Kasubok gid ko subong. I'm not having a good time in my relationship. My husband is kasabad gid. My wife is pasuway gid. Biskan ano lang. And we go, I'll be happier with somebody else. And so they leave their marriage to try to find something they think is going to make them happier. By the way, spoiler alert, it never does. It's never ever an answer, practically, nor spiritually. People abandon Jesus Christ. They cheat on the Lord because they think there's something in the world that'll make me happier. God says He is all that I need, but the world seems to be a better solution. I think money, I think possessions, fill in the blank, whatever it might be, that's what will make me happier, so I'm going to go after that rather than go after Jesus Christ. That is a wicked and an adulterous generation who will never receive the Lord, who cannot see the works that He does because they do not want Him in their hearts. They want the world, not God. So Jesus says, I'm only going to give you one sign. You want a sign from heaven? Here it is. What's the sign that He gives to them? The sign of Jonah. Now, He doesn't explain that here because He already had. Back in Matthew chapter 12, verse 40, when they first asked for a sign, this is the second time, ang sabat ni Jesus sa ila, the only sign I will give you is the sign of Jonah, which was, Jonah was 3 days, talo kaadlaw, and 3 nights inside of the whale. And Jesus said, so will he be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Speaking of His death, burial, and resurrection. The only sign He was going to give to them was the message of the gospel. And it's still the only sign. I don't want you to miss this. They asked again, liwat sila, show us a sign. Jesus said, there's only one sign I could ever show you because there's only one way. And it doesn't make a difference, by the way. You can ask as many times as you want to. How do I get to heaven? Through faith in Jesus Christ. 10 minutes later, Pastor, how do I get to heaven? By faith in Jesus Christ. 2 days later, how do I get to heaven? It's still by faith in Jesus Christ. 2 years later, Pastor, I want to know how to get to heaven. It's still by faith in Jesus Christ. It doesn't make a difference how many times people ask. The answer never changes. There's only one hope, one sign, one road, one way, one door, and it's Jesus. There's one mediator between God and man. There's one door that leads to heaven. There's only one way, and it is Jesus. He said, that's the only sign I can give you. It's not the only sign He wanted to. It's the only sign that could save them. But notice that was it. For having given Jesus this answer to these Pharisees, these Sadducees, He left and He departed. Don't miss that. Kung halin ka, kag nagwa ka, that's the same thing. If you leave and you depart, you just repeated the statement twice. Why did Jesus leave and then depart? It's emphatic. It's meant to be very intentional. It literally means Jesus gave up on them. He said, wala chance para sa inyo, tiga gid. I'm done. And indeed He was. This would be the last time Jesus would have any meaningful interaction other than to openly challenge them where they will ultimately choose to crucify Him. This is Jesus saying, I've given you over, you guys are through. For they wanted nothing to do with the Lord, nothing to do with the message of salvation that Jesus came to give. Therefore, there was nothing He could do for them. He left, and then He departed. But that brings us to the second thing we want to look at this morning in verses 5 through 12, which is the warning Jesus gives. And it's powerful. Look at verse 6. Jesus said to his disciples, "Take heed, bantay lang, kagkulbaan naman, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees." So the disciples got into the boat. They sailed over to the other side. They've left the western shores by Capernaum. They've gone back over to the area of the Decapolis, most likely because Jesus recognized how upset the religious leaders were. Remember, if he sticks around too long, they're going to kill him. Eventually they will. But the time was not yet, so nakalencha, he gets out of there. But when he arrives over in the eastern shores, he gives this warning: watch out for leaven. Now, as a reminder, basin ng lipa ka mo, what is leaven? We have a name for it in English. We call it yeast. Consilango, it is pahabok, no? Yeah, I get that wrong sometimes. Not yabok. I got yabok. I see yabok and I went, yabok? Don't put yabok in your bread. It won't taste good. Pahabok na lang is the yeast that you put in your bread, which it does not take much. When you put yeast in bread, basta jutay na lang. Yeast is a live organism, by the way. It is actually a form of a bacteria that duplicates. It's actually like a fungus that reproduces itself. And as it consumes the sugar in the dough, it gives off carbon dioxide, causing it to rise and puff up. And the picture is universally used in the Bible of sin. Yeast, leaven, pahabok is sin. And it's the same picture. When we allow sin into our life, basta jutay na lang, it will spread. It will consume us. It puffs us up, makes us arrogant, thinking we don't need God, don't want God, and eventually it can will destroy your life. Jesus is warning the disciples about this influence of the Pharisees. Pero hindi nakantindi sa ila. For back up a minute to verse 5. For we're told, nadabok sila, they crossed over, pero naglipat ang mga disciples ang tinapay. They forgot to bring the food. They forgot bread. So when Jesus questioned them regarding the leaven, ilapinsar na lang, he's talking about bread. And they went, kig siya sa atong, nabasigutom na siya. He's not happy. He's thinking we've got no food and we forgot the bread. And oh my goodness, how foolish are we? But the disciples missed what Jesus was talking about because they did not ask. Please don't miss this. Notice how they handled it. They gathered together. Grupo barkada sila, ang 12 kabilang, they're all gathered around. What did he talk about? Leaven. What leaven? I don't know. It's the tinapay. We forgot the bread. No, we forgot the tinapay. Basi gutom na siya. And they're talking amongst themselves. Who aren't they talking to? Jesus, the one who gave them the instructions. They're reasoning, they're thinking the best answer they can come up with rather than asking the one who has all the answers. Now listen, because we can relate to this. Something bad happens in our life. Why did that take place? Why am I sick? Why do I have no money? Fill in the blank, whatever the problem might be. Our first question is, who do we ask? Why is this happening to me? What do you think? What's going on in my life right now? And they give their ideas. You ask somebody else, well, why do you think this is happening to me? We reason, we try to figure out, but we don't ask God, who's the one who's actually in control of our circumstances and could tell us why things are happening. Isaiah chapter 1 verse 18 says, Come, palapit na ta. Come, let us reason together, says the Lord. Though your sins are as scarlet, I want to make them as white as snow. Why are we going through hardships? Why are we going through difficulties? Because God's trying to get our attentions. God's trying to teach us a lesson. But rather than going to the answer, we talk amongst ourselves. To which brings a rebuke. Notice verse 8. Jesus, knowing what they were talking about, we can't pull the wool over God's eyes. He knows what we're thinking and He knows what we're talking about at all times. He knew what they were discussing and He says, "Oh, you of little faith." Why are you reasoning among yourselves? Because you have no bread. Now stop right here. For this is the fourth and final time Jesus is going to rebuke the disciples for having jutay pagtuo. The first time he rebuked them was back when, in Matthew chapter 6, verse 30, they were worried about God's provision. Do not worry about what you will eat. Do not worry about what you will wear. Oh, you of little faith. Your Father in heaven knows what you have need of. He goes on again in Matthew chapter 8, verse 26. When Jesus was out in the boat, tanan-tanan mga disciples nagsunod sa iya. Siya nagtulog. May bagyo naman. There's big waves. Kusog-kusog ng hangin. Strong winds. And they wake him up and they go, Lord, don't you know we're going to die? Jesus had told them, "Nagtabok kita." The Word of God told them where they were going to go, told them where they were going to be. He said, you have little faith. Why would you doubt the Word of the Lord? Ikatatlo na lang, a third time Jesus challenged him. Now this one, I got to admit, I'm pretty sure I would have been doubting as well. Matthew chapter 14, Peter's on the water, walking on top of water. And as long as he keeps his eyes on Jesus, he's okay. Suddenly he sees the wind, he sees the waves, kulbaan na siya. He starts to sink. Jesus pulls him out and says, you have little faith. Why did you doubt? Why did you take your eyes off Jesus Christ? And now a fourth time. Why do you have little faith? What were they doing now? Remember, faith is not about quantity. We don't have damo pagtuo or jutay pagtuo. That's how faith works. Faith is about who we look to. If we are looking to Jesus, eyes on Jesus, listening to the word of Jesus, putting our confidence in Jesus, dako ta. Our faith is very big. If we put our faith in anything else, anywhere else, gamay na lang, our faith is small. What were the disciples putting their faith in? Ila pinsar. They reasoned, they thought, they tried to figure it out because they're depending upon their understanding. O you of little faith. Why are you reasoning amongst yourselves? Why are you trying to figure this out? Why not just go to the answer? Now this, I got to tell you, is a powerful truth. Please listen. Because this is what we do constantly. You want to say who's guilty? Hands up in the air. Man, this is how we always handle our problems. Things go wrong. We don't understand what's going on. We fall back on our wisdom, our understanding, and God looks at us and goes, oh, you of little faith. Why reason amongst yourselves? Go to the one who has the answer. To which Jesus simply gave them a memory to pull out. He told them to think back on what he'd already done. Look at verse 9. Don't you understand? Remember, the 5 loaves that fed 5,000. How much did you have left over? It's a question. He asked them, pila ka baskets nagbilin when I fed the 5,000? 12. How many disciples are there? 12. For every one of you, there was a basket left over after feeding 5,000 men plus ilang mga asawa, ilang mga bata. When you fed the 4,000, how many loaves were left over? How much bread was left over? Pito. Only 7, but don't forget. Dako, gid nga sulodlan. Huge baskets left over. So sobra gid, plenty left over. He says, then why is it that you think I'm talking to you about bread? Here's the simple point. The Lord is not worried about our provision. God is never going to sit there and go, ay gali, kulang akong kwarta subong. He's not sitting there going, I don't have enough to take care of your financial needs. I don't have enough to be able to heal your physical needs. God's never lacking in ability. He's never lacking in resources. And all we'd ever have to do, if we just stop for a minute, unta lang anay. If we stopped and we remembered, ano sa nagligad? Did God take care of me? Yes. Did God provide for me? Always. then why would we sit there and think suddenly that God now is lacking? He's saying this is not what worries God. He's not concerned about bread. He's not concerned about money. He's not concerned about our health. None of these things are what make God concerned. What does concern him? Beware, verse 11, of the leaven of the scribes and the Pharisees. What God does not want us to get involved with, what he's concerned about, is a bad influence. In Mark chapter 8, verse 17, Jesus, in the parallel account, it's the exact same story as we're reading here in Matthew, turns to them and says, "Are your hearts hard?" The word in the Greek is calloused. Have you so given yourself over to the world? Are you so consumed about what you need, the money, the food, the pursuit of this life, that you are calloused and don't see what's actually dangerous to you? God uses our circumstances to bring us closer to Him. He's not worried about provision. He's worried about us hardening our heart and missing the need we have for Jesus Christ. This is what makes God nervous. He knows how easy it is for us to be distracted, how easy it is for us to walk away, to be caught up in the things of this life, the concerns of this life, the sins, palibot gid sa aton, that can stumble us, and how that can harden us so that we miss our need for Jesus Christ. Which is when the disciples got it. Notice verse 12 sa katapusan. The light bulb goes on. Sige na. Ay, nakantindi na sila. You're not talking about bread. You're talking about the teachings, the doctrines. That is the leaven of the scribes and the Pharisees. And the picture is powerful. Be careful what we allow into our lives. Be careful what we consume. Figure if we're not careful, it can poison us. It can spread. It can keep us from seeing our need for Jesus Christ. I don't know if you like oysters, talaba. Some people love them, some people not so much. I've got to be honest, I don't think I've ever tried one. I've been offered many times. Would you care for some talaba? No, thank you. It's not a religious thing, by the way. It's nothing to do with it being something forbidden to eat. Kulbaan na lang ko. I don't want to eat it. It might be the tastiest thing on the face of the planet. It might kanamiging nga sabor, but I've heard too many stories. You eat an oyster, you think it's okay. 2 days later, you're in the hospital. I've heard too many times where it just ends up getting you because you did something dangerous. You played with something maybe you should not have. And not that I'm saying don't eat talaba. If you enjoy talaba, hey, take your risk. You know the potential, go for it if you want to go for it. If you enjoy the flavor, try it. But understand that spiritually, this is still a powerful truth. Be careful what you consume. Be careful what you allow in. Because what we allow into our lives absolutely can affect us. It can poison us, harden us, make us calloused to Jesus Christ. You might sit there and go, well, can you watch movies? Sure, you can watch movies. But be aware. Be open and understand that what we allow in, what we consume, the influences we take into our lives, I don't care where it comes from. If it comes from social media, if it comes from movies, if it comes from, whatever might be the case, music. The things we allow into our lives, the influences we bring into our lives, they can be leaven. A poison that spreads and can infect us and harden our heart to Jesus Christ. This is what God was worried about. This is what Jesus warned them about. Be very careful on the people, the influences, the teachings that you allow into your life, for they can harden your heart to Jesus.